Focus on the reasons why you must be healthy every day, or the donuts will always win. And donuts don't make you sexy. Research suggests that getting a sugar burst can lower your testosterone levels by up to 25% for men or for women, which decreases your interest in sex. Oh, great! This means that sharing the cheesecake at the restaurant may mean that no one will get dessert when you get home. Step number 3, know your brain type. When I first started to do our brain imaging work at the Amen Clinics in 1991, I was looking for the one pattern that was associated with depression, ADD, or bipolar disorder. But as I soon discovered, there was clearly not one pattern associated with any of these illnesses. They all had multiple types. Of course, I then realized there will never be just one pattern for depression, because not all depressed people are the same. Some are withdrawn, others are angry, still others are anxious or obsessive. The scans help me understand the type of depression or ADD or bipolar disorder a person had, so that I could better target their treatment. This one idea led to a dramatic breakthrough in my own personal effectiveness with patients, and it opened up a whole new world of understanding and hope for the tens of thousands of people who have come to the Amen Clinics and the millions of people who have read my books. As we looked at the brains of our overweight patients, we discovered that, again, there was not one brain pattern associated with being overweight. There were at least 5. We saw patterns associated with brains that tended to be compulsive. Some were impulsive. Others were sad. Still others were anxious, in various combinations. This is exactly the reason why most diets don't work. They take a one-size-fits-all approach, which from our brain imaging work makes absolutely no sense at all. I will describe the first 2 types here, and then after a short break, I'll tell you about the other 3. There is much more information, including a detailed self-test, in the program materials. And as we will see, most people will never need a brain scan to know their type. Brain type 1 is the compulsive overeater. People with this type tend to get stuck on the thought of food and feel compulsively driven to eat. They often say that they have no control over food and tend to be nighttime eaters because they worry and have trouble sleeping. Here are 2 SPECT scans. This view shows us areas of the brain that work too hard. Blue is average activity, and red shows us the most active parts of the brain. The healthy scan on the left shows that most of the high activity is in the back part of the brain. Compulsive overeaters generally have too much activity in the front part of their brains, usually due to low levels of a chemical called serotonin. So they overfocus and can get stuck on the same thought, such as the ice cream in the freezer that is calling your name. Amy is an ICU nurse who fit this type perfectly. She felt as though she couldn't stop herself from eating and thought about food constantly throughout the day. She described her thoughts like a little mouse on an exercise wheel, and the mouse couldn't get off. Caffeine and diet pills made Amy anxious because her brain did not need more stimulation, and she often felt as though she needed a glass of wine at night, or 2 or 3, to calm her worries. No diet would work for Amy long term until we calmed her brain. Compulsive overeaters like Amy, who lost 45 pounds with the strategies I'm going to give you, do best when we find natural ways to increase serotonin. Serotonin is calming to the brain. Physical exercise boosts serotonin, as does using supplements such as 5-HTP and St. John's wort. 5-HTP actually has very good scientific evidence that it can be helpful for weight loss, and in my experience, I found it to be especially helpful for this type. One other secret: stop the nighttime eating after dinner. New research suggests that people who eat late at night tend to gain even more weight than people who eat the same number of calories during the day. I know many people who say that the only time they feel hungry is at night, but that is usually because they have a lot of bad brain habits, like skipping breakfast or going too long between meals. Brain type 2 is the impulsive overeater. People with this type have poor impulse control. They get easily distracted and just reach for food without thinking. One of my best friends is a perfect example of this type. He is on a diet every single day of his life. He wakes up every morning committed to the idea of eating right. He maintains that thought as he passes the first donut shop. He starts to sweat as he passes the second donut shop. And by the third one, he has no willpower left. After completely giving up on his plans by noon, he utters the famous words of all impulsive overeaters: "I'll start my diet tomorrow." His scan showed low activity in the front part of his brain in an area called the prefrontal cortex. Think of the prefrontal cortex like the brain's brake. It stops us from saying stupid things or making bad decisions. It is the little voice in your head that helps you decide between the banana and the banana split. Impulsive overeating is common among people who have ADD or attention deficit disorder, which has been associated with low dopamine levels in the brain. People with ADD struggle with short attention span, distractibility, disorganization, and impulsivity. Research suggests that having untreated ADD nearly doubles your risk for being overweight. And without proper treatment, it is nearly impossible for these people to be consistent with any nutrition plan. My research team and I have published several studies showing that when people with ADD try to concentrate, they actually get less activity in their prefrontal cortex, which causes them to have even less control over their own behavior. For these people, literally, the harder they try, the worse it gets. Overweight smokers and heavy coffee drinkers also tend to fit this type. We help impulsive overeaters by boosting dopamine levels in the brain and strengthening the prefrontal cortex. In the last segment, I told you about the first two brain types associated with being overweight. In this segment, I'll tell you about the other three types and give you 3 more of the 10 essential steps to change your brain and change your body. If you remember, brain type 1 is the compulsive overeater who constantly thinks about food. Brain type 2 is the impulsive overeater who eats without thinking. Brain type 3 is a combination of types 1 and types 2 and is called the impulsive compulsive overeater. On the surface, it seems almost contradictory. How can you be both impulsive and compulsive at the same time? Think of compulsive gamblers. These are people who are compulsively driven to gamble and yet have very little control over their impulses. It is the same with these overeaters. Our scans tend to show too much activity in the attention region of the brain, so people overthink and can get stuck on negative thoughts, but they also have too little activity in the prefrontal cortex, so they have trouble supervising their own behavior. Sherry had bulimia as a teenager, and still at age 52 struggled with binging and purging whenever she was stressed. She was chronically 30 pounds overweight and hated how she looked. She vacillated between being obsessive about her housework to being overwhelmed and disorganized. Many people in her family struggled with alcohol and other addictions, which is very common in this type. Sherry had tried a number of diets without any success until the fen-phen craze of the 90s. Remember fen-phen? It was a combination of medications that increased both serotonin and dopamine. She did really well on it, losing 30 pounds, and felt more emotionally stable than at any time in her life. When fen-phen was pulled from the market because it caused medical problems, Sherry relapsed and went back on her emotional and weight roller coaster. Without a balanced brain, she could not balance her weight. Finally, Sherry came to see us for help. People with this type benefit from treatments that increase both serotonin and dopamine, such as exercise and a combination of supplements like 5-HTP and green tea. For Sherry, this combination gave her the extra boost she needed to again feel emotionally stable and to lose the extra 30 pounds. Giving her 5-HTP or green tea alone would have made her worse. Brain type 4 is the sad overeater. People with this type overeat to medicate their feeling of sadness and to calm the emotional storms in their brains. They often struggle with depression, low energy, low self-esteem, pain symptoms, and they tend to gain weight in winter. Paul was a supervisor at Boeing near Seattle. Over time, he noticed, particularly in the winter, his weight would go up and his mood would go down. He also struggled with depression for many years. Paul's problem wasn't a lack of willpower, it was his brain. His SPECT scan showed too much activity in the limbic or emotional part of his brain, which is commonly seen in mood disorders and in people who have had emotional trauma. Of note, Paul also had a very low vitamin D level, which has been recently associated with weight problems. For this type, besides boosting vitamin D when it is low, exercise, fish oil, and certain supplements such as SAMe can be very helpful to balance the brain and improve your mood. It can also help with energy and decrease pain. Vitamin D and SAMe in combination were very helpful for Paul. Brain type 5 is the anxious overeater. People with this type medicate their feelings of anxiety with food. Connie felt nervous most of the time. She was always waiting for something bad to happen, and she frequently suffered from headaches and stomach problems. Marijuana helped to relax her, but she hated doing something illegal. Food worked really well to calm her down, but being 5'2" and 165 pounds made her very unhappy. Connie's SPECT study showed too much activity in an area of the brain called the basal ganglia. This part of the brain is involved in setting a person's anxiety level,